Computer, initialize holosuite.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Sci-Fi Feminist podcast. Today, I'm joined once again by my good friend in academia, Courtney. Today, we will be talking about the latest Cruella film, which was fascinating and awesome and cool. And I'm sure she has a lot of insights to share about that episode today. So you can look forward to a really fun-filled episode on Cruella. Yes, without further ado, let me introduce Courtney. Yes, hi, Courtney. How are you doing?
Hi, Tina. I'm great. Thanks. And you. Thank you for having me back.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for being willing to come on the show again. The previous episode with you was so much fun, and I learned a lot, and I think it was very insightful. So yes, I asked you back to talk about Cruella. So maybe first things first, what did you think about the movie in general? And what stood out for you about the movie? I also have a few things, but I'd be interested to hear about your ideas first.
So when I first watched the movie, obviously I was very nervous that they were going to try and turn this psychopath into a good person. And I think there were a couple of moments there where they did walk the line, and I was like, no. Initially, I think it was they turned the Dalmatians into villains, and I was like, no, please don't do this. And then they killed off her mother, and I was like, no, please stop doing this. And I literally turned to my friend Riley, and I was like, I don't think I'm going to like this movie. And she's like, just maybe watch more than, 12 minutes of it. Like, just maybe watch a little bit more. And then it got really good. And I think we had this character that was insane. But she was, I realized she was, after watching the movie, because I had this whole thing where I was like, I want her to be like the Joker, insane. You know how he was like, crafted by society, but he was insane. Like, no one was like, I want to be like the Joker when I grow up. And I think with women, something I realized afterwards is that's never possible. Like, you will never have this truly insane character because of all of the, I want to say, like, innate systems put onto us in society. So I think we got almost like the closest to an insane character with this Cruella de Vil reimagined kind of figure. But yes, what were your thoughts?
Wow, that's very interesting. Maybe before, maybe let me share my thoughts first. I'd be interested to hear what you mean by, like, why we can't have a female Joker or women and society. But let me share my thoughts. Keep that in mind, because I keep forgetting and interrupting myself. So yes, for me, same kind of thing. I was scared that first of all, they're kind of gonna find a way to frame this really, really evil person in a good way and kind of justify the skinning of puppies and stuff, which which I'm glad they didn't do. And but one thing that really stood out for me, and this is such a Disney trope, and this is one thing where I think the first Maleficent movie succeeded at, but the second one and other Disney movies I've also seen, they kind of keeps falling into this trap of still villainizing older women and villainizing them because they are ambitious and successful. Not for any other reason. And then again, pitting these two women against each other, they can't both be successful. The one has to fall in order for the other one to be raised up. And for me, I was a little bit sad about that, because I don't think it has to be that way. And I think that's just something that Disney, it's maybe a formula, putting these two women against each other. But then her as an insane person, I find it quite interesting. There seems to be like sub-themes of multiple personalities or mental illness. She actually seems to have a legitimate thing, like her personality completely changes when she becomes Cruella. And I found that quite interesting. It kind of verged on that really, actually representing some serious mental state, like a split personality, which I found quite interesting too. And then the other thing is that female genius is also kind of equated with hysteria. This older woman is a genius in fashion, and Cruella too, but they're both represented as kind of crazy. And I think she uses the word psycho a lot. She says something like, yeah, I was scared I'm going to be a psycho like my mother, or her real mother. Or she was scared she's actually a legitimate psycho, or so she uses that term to describe it. So despite it being a very cool movie, visually I was like, there were some scenes, especially when her fashion gets into, when she starts making her fashion and appearing as Cruella, I thought like some visual scenes were really cool, and it's a really fun movie. But in terms of tropes and how they represent women, some parts are a little bit dodgy still. Yeah, and then the final thing was the cross-dressing. I really enjoyed that when she picks them up in the truck, and then she has a mustache, and when she cross-dressed, I really enjoyed that. But that was very minimal. Maybe it would have been cool if there was more of that. So yeah, I'm not sure. What are your thoughts, about these female villains?
So I think Disney always puts their like little stamp of remember the patriarchy, kids, on everything. And I think the one thing that I did enjoy was that some of the more, I would say like typical kind of qualities attributed to female-driven movies, they were removed. So like there was this potential romantic relationship between her and Jasper. And there was even a moment where she was like, that's one of the many things I love about you. And he was like, okay, like, And I was like, that's amazing, because we're not trying to like force this romantic relationship because she's a woman, you know, like 9 out of 10, even like in the Marvel universe, like you have this strong woman, like you have Black Widow, and now it's all of a sudden she's like, oh, I'm in love with the Hulk. And you're like, where did that come from? There has been no background on this. And even with this, so like I love that we had this very, very strong potential for a romantic relationship. And they were like, no thanks. Anyway, moving on. Let's go and like maybe kill my mother. I don't know. And I think it was also quite interesting because I was worried there was going to be like this whole almost, not Electra complex, because there wasn't a dad really involved, but like this whole thing of like, I need to kill my mother for power. And that did essentially happen. But throughout most of the movie, I was like, oh, I hope this is not like I need to redeem my mother's death. And then there was like such a fun twist where it was like, oh, your mother killed your mother, but also she's not your mother, but this one is your mother, and deal with that emotionally. So I really enjoyed that. And I think it was interesting seeing, because I think another thing is like as soon as we see women pitted against women, we're instantly like, you know, like Michelle Pfeiffer and Angelina Jolie. But the one thing I did enjoy was I think the Baroness's character could exist like as a male character. Like I don't think she was so narcissistic, and she was delightful, really. Like her overconfidence, like I really enjoyed her as a character, because even though she was evil, honestly, throughout everything, like at some point he was like, you look amazing. And she was like, no, I know. Like she was never like, oh, thank you, panded to my feminine side as a narcissist. Like she always wanted her genius to be kind of accelerated in, you know, how she was recognized. And I really appreciated that as well, because I think even though we do still have very problematic qualities of like woman against woman, like why? But I also liked how the women had very almost like typical masculine qualities attributed to them, and the things that they were fighting for, it wasn't like a man or love or even a dress, it was power. And that was something I did appreciate, even though again, like why can't there be 2 women in power? I'm just saying. But I did really enjoy even just Cruella as like the female grotesque. Like when she donned her Cruella de Vil outfit, I was like, oh, mwah, beautiful. Because you know the female grotesque is like a character that always has this duality, and they kind of, well, it embodies almost like the sexualized version of the femme fatale with like the liminal abject version of the grotesque. So I think Cruella really as a figure embodied that beautifully, because you had this almost pantomime makeup and these very sharp geometric outfits and this insanity that kind of came through in hysteria. But then you had like this, again, like she was almost the virgin and the whore. I'm not being rude, I'm quoting from Milan. So from Gary Milan and Chloe Buckley. But I think that she was just brilliant as she could be right now. Let's say there is lots that could still be worked on, but I was very happy to see how she had been reimagined.
Wow, that's very interesting. Actually, I was going to ask about the female grotesque, Grotesque, because I don't know much about it, to be very honest. I never did a lot of research into it. So, I kind of watched the movie trying to keep in mind the femme fatale, female grotesque, but I think your framework for it is much more detailed. So I was wondering, could you maybe give some, you explained the female grotesque a little bit. Could you maybe give a little bit more detail, like what exactly that entails? And how does Cruella really embody it? Do you
look at my notes I made? So the female grotesque is essentially kind of like the epitome of like carnivalesque excess. So with abject figures, with the abject is like something that kind of traverses boundaries, and it like sits just on the outside. It makes you it gives you the crawls, but you don't know why you have the crawls. And the female grotesque is far more fascinating than that, because it almost absorbs that liminality and puts it into like normal spaces. So it's obviously attached to woman, the female grotesque, but it's very fascinating because there is almost like the sense of, I don't want to say freedom, because that's a very problematic word to use by a creation of the patriarchy, but there is almost let's say, wiggle room in the female grotesque, because you have a female character essentially that takes on almost an ultra feminine, I want to say, mask. So she has makeup on, but it's bright red with black like eyeshadow and like long talon nails. And I was so happy to see Cruella de Vil did have her talons, because even in the 101 Dalmatians film, something that's very prominent, I think it's 102 Dalmatians, when she turns back to an insane person, like her shoulder pads come out of nowhere and her nails grow. And I'm just like, that's the female grotesque. Like, you take this normal woman who is feminine, and then you're like, double it and then add talons. And that's why the female grotesque is amazing. And as Chloe Buckley says, the female grotesque creates a risky opportunity for women to break out of patriarchal central, but can also confirm the association of women with monstrosity. So that's why it is problematic, because, hello, it is the monstrous, Janine's cat just walked past, it is the monstrous woman. So a term like that has problematic associations with it, but in having the monstrous woman, you are almost holding up like norms and showing how problematic they are. And that's why the female grotesque is very important. And also, like I said, Buckley says she encompasses the duality of the virgin and the whore, and she arises usually when there's like a troubled boundary. So the female grotesque is so difficult to define because there isn't like one way to define her. She comes as a result of challenging a boundary. So only once the boundary has been transgressed or traversed, or jumping in between it, that is when the female grotesque can come about. And that's why it is difficult. It's similar to the abject, where you can't just say like, that's the abject, because you have to explain the context of it for it to exist, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Wow, that's really now I get it. Yeah, thank you for explaining that so well. So I'm interested to hear the older lady, because I kind of felt like Cruella in the 101 and 102 Dalmatians, she kind of fits that female grotesque, which is both very empowering but also quite problematic, depending on how you look at it. It's right up there with post-feminism, I guess, and the femme fatale. But then I kind of felt like what we see here is that, okay, there's Cruella now, and she has that, like you say, the virgin and the whore, quote unquote. But then the older lady, she obviously does not fit the female grotesque, but I felt like she became the Cruella we saw in 101 and 102 Dalmatians, because she's still the older lady. So I'm wondering, with the female grotesque, does it relate to age? Because many female villains, they are older women. And I think that's also a Disney thing of villainizing older women. I'm wondering if you have any comments on that. What age has to do with it?
So I remember reading an article, and I cannot remember the name for the life of me. It was like, anyway, but in that article, as my honors year, she discussed how there are 3 tropes in Disney films. You have the virginal maiden, who is like singing with the birds and also has no clue what's happening behind her. And then you have the asexual fairy godmother, who could be a man, could be a woman, probably is a woman, and is granting wishes. And then you have the sexualized stepmother. And the sexualized stepmother is the villain because she isn't virginal. She has kids usually, and she's older, and like she isn't like this atypical kind of virginal maiden, but she's definitely still sexualized. So she's not an asexual fairy godmother, and therefore she becomes vilified. And as a result of that, I think that is still a trope that exists very prominently within Disney in general. But the one thing that I do find interesting is I feel like the Baroness, as soon as we found out that the Baroness was Cruella's mother, there was this almost potential that she was like an alternate version of Cruella, as you said, like she could be Cruella. And then I think it's almost like there were multiple dualities taking place, because Cruella had her own duality between Stella and Cruella. And then, you know, I remember laughing and joking and saying, could they define the duality even any more further than the fact that she was born with black and white hair, like a domino? But then you had like, so she had her own internal battle. And then once we realized who the Baroness was, I feel like that was almost another duality, almost like of a present and future kind of paradox, where like it's not paradox, but contrast, where like this is who she could become. And how the movie ends with her giving like Anita and Roger a Dalmatian. I was like, are we starting this again? Like, is she living up to her insanity, or are we trying to tie this into a neat little bow? Like, where are we sitting with this? So it was, yeah, I think she definitely has something to do with age. And I think also Cruella is, I mean, Emma Stone is not like this overly feminine Hollywood star. You know, she does have a bit of feedback on her looks, and she's got very big eyes. And she's not like, a Baldwin or Hadid. And I think that also adds to it, because you've got age as a contrast, but you've also got someone who's not necessarily like, again, this little virginal maiden. I mean, half the time she's got makeup smothered down her face, or she's wearing like quite big glasses that obscure her face. She's not really at any point where you're like, wow, she's beautiful, like a princess. You're like, wow, she looks intriguing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think
that's an interesting point, how sexualization and sexuality has a lot to do with the older woman, because like you said, what's interesting about the Baroness is that she's not actually framed in terms of her sexuality. Her character is actually more masculine. She's actually like a man in a woman's body. And then Cruella too, she's also not sexualized, to the point where at some stage she cross dresses and she dresses up like a guy. And I told my sister, I wish they cast what's her name, Eva Green as Cruella, because I thought that would have been like a better casting choice. That's what I would have done. And then my sister said, Janine, you need to keep in mind like the type of movies that Eva Green has been in, or the series like Penny Dreadful. There are some hectic scenes in there, and actually technically Cruella is a Disney film for kids, so that needs to be taken into consideration too. And when you mentioned the romantic relationship too, actually there's nothing about sexualization or sex or anything. So I think even though the Baroness might fit many tropes of like this older woman, and I remember reading that the older women in Disney, they're kind of represented at the height of their sexuality, like the older version of Maleficent too. And that's what makes them terrifying, because there are these older women who are their sexuality is very threatening because they are kind of Sorry,
and they're powerful. They have so much power and sexuality.
Yeah, so I guess that combination is just terrifying. That's like the worst thing ever. But then here we see women have power, and we see them have they're really smart and powerful, but there's not that sexual a part to it. So I think that's quite interesting. I think that's a shift in the trope that we're starting to see regarding female villains.
I think the one thing that was also very fascinating to me was the Baroness was willing to do the ultimate like maternal abject thing, was kill her baby because of competition, of like attention. And I was like, that is such a fascinating you know, she was, even at the end, she was like, oh, I always look for someone to like battle with genius. And it was still not a maternal conversation. She wasn't like, oh, I missed you, my daughter. She was like, I've been looking for someone as great as me, and you're kind of close-ish. Now I'm gonna throw you off a cliff. And I think that she is, you know, she's got her male, the men work below her, first of all, and they answer to her, which is fascinating. But there's no sexual energy between her. And even when she gets betrayed by men, you're not like, oh, she's like, okay, gross. Anyway, moving on. Like even when she's caught out as like trying to kill off her own daughter, she's like, she fell. Like she's a very good example of the female grotesque, because the female grotesque is very pantomime-y. So like in 102 Dalmatians, when Cruella's made into a cake and they like come to arrest her, and she's like, is there something wrong? And she's like literally a human cake with like her hair on fire. And she's like, oh, I'm sorry, darling, there's something wrong here. And it's just, even in the Baroness, she's like, she fell, okay? Like, calm down. Let's go back to the party. Ugh. And it's great because like she just yeeted her daughter off a cliff. The tone was slightly different. If the characters were slightly different, it would be horrific. And she was just like, ugh. And even Cruella was like, ugh. It was just a very, like a moment that should be horrific was just like, okay, so what's going to happen now? She's obviously still alive. So yeah, this is a very, it was a wonderful example of the female grotesque. And I feel like the female grotesque is a dangerous topic for a lot of people because there is a level of empowerment that comes with it. So I think the Baroness was cool. She was powerful. Like if you had to describe her with a word, it would be powerful. You wouldn't be like she's sick. I mean, her hair, she's never got like long, beautiful locks. And even when she is pregnant, she's like torn through her room like a hysterical maniac. So like she looks at the camera and she's like, I'm pregnant. And you're like, should you be? Oh. And her husband is weaker, so you don't feel like there's a strong sexual connection between them. So I think she's like the Baroness alone, aside from Cruella, is such a fascinating character.
Yeah, it's quite interesting how she's represented as a mother, as you mentioned. And I guess that's also one of the most like horrifying things. And this has been discussed a lot in relation to Alien as well, or at least what I've read. This idea in the first Alien, they call the ship mother, and then the ship turns on them. Or not the ship, but the ship has been given instructions, you know, that the crew is expendable, the ship needs to save the alien. So mother is represented as this really scary force that does not care for her children, you know, who would be the crew of the ship. And then, of course, in the second Alien 2, we have this monstrous alien queen. And she's also this devouring force. She's not maternal. She gives birth to these aliens, and she kind of devours everything in her path. You know, it's this... it's funny, this, like, what the most scary thing ever is a mother that doesn't care for her children or that's willing to kill her babies. And I think that's both, like you say, you know, it really fits with that abject, the notion of the abject, but it also really subverts this idea of, you know, women and motherhood, because that is such a dodgy area for feminism always, because you know, as soon as women become mothers, it's been argued by the second wave feminists, as soon as they become a mother, they are subject to patriarchy, because, you know, then women are placed in the role of maternal, caring, always sacrificing for their children, not being able to exist for herself, all of those problematic things. So then we have this mother that's like, yeah, I'm just gonna, you know, kill my baby, just kill it. And that really subverts all of that. So it's kind of yeah, it's I think it's both very empowering, but I also think it's a little bit problematic too. You know, mothers killing their babies isn't
But you know, the thing I thought to myself was, I remember watching her being insane, the Baroness, and the thought that ran through my head was, not everyone should be a mother. And I think like that's also such an important thing, because you have this woman who goes so against being a mother. And I liked that it was like, you know what, maybe some people should not be mothers. It's not a thing where as soon as you have this baby, you settle down and like internally you just calm down as a person. Sometimes you are unhinged, and having a baby is the worst possible thing. And I think there is, again, because everything is seeped in misogyny and patriarchal structures. So everything I say is it always has a problematic edge to it. There's nothing I will say about feminism or anything that has not got a problematic patriarchal edge to it. But I think there is this almost freedom, or not freedom again, but there is this counter argument where you are saying maybe not everyone should be a mother, because you're not even doing the abject motherhood of, let's say, like a demon or something, where you're like, it's still like there's, you know, a lot of like the Lilith characters I discussed, she feels very close to her children, but it's like still weird. This person was like, I do not want to have a child, I'm very unhappy, and I will kill my baby. And even the queen in Snow White, she's not related to Snow White, so when she like wants to kill off Snow White, you're like, ah, cool, like there's no maternal connection there. But here we literally have, I think, a Disney character who knows her mother, and her mother's like, I'm probably going to try and kill you. I'm definitely going to try and kill you multiple times. And in horrific ways, not just like bang, you're gone, you went missing. Like, I'm going to burn your house to the ground and maybe throw you off a cliff. I don't know. We'll see. So, yeah, I think she's weird, but I think she's very cool in that she is willing to not only subvert the traditional maternal kind of vibe that we're supposed to all adhere to, but she's almost like a counter argument. You're like, maybe some people should not be a mother. Counter argument.
That's very interesting that you mentioned that, because, you know, there's like you say, it's kind of assumed that all women have this what they call is it a biological clock, that all women want to have children, first of all, and that all women should have children. And like you say, actually some women shouldn't, and that's totally fine. And I think you know, it kind of provides this possibility to de-essentialize women, to be like, you know, you're not going to become caring and maternal and soft and self-sacrificing and all of those things as soon as you have a child. It's not like that. You know, for some women, it's not like that. And I think that presents a very good take on de-essentializing women. And then, like you say, she has a very masculine character too. So it's not to say that because she's had a child, now she's very feminine and all of that. But even though she had a child, she remains a very narcissistic, masculine, ambitious, all of those types of things that kind of seem to contradict motherhood or contradict the maternal. And usually in my research, I saw that when we see something like that, it's usually related to adoptive motherhood. So adoptive motherhood tends to be more, how can I say, like empowering, according to some arguments, because of this essentializing thing. But the fact that a biological mother is represented in this way, I think, yeah, it could be quite subversive. Yeah, I didn't think about it like that. Actually, for me, I was just like, the Baroness is problematic for me in every aspect, but you've really opened my eyes to her potential as a feminist character. Yeah, so thank you for that.
I think it's just because I am obsessed with Emma Thompson. So anything she does, I'm like, oh, I love you, Emma. You're amazing. Just keep doing you. I'll find the good in you. But I love this one moment in it where she is reading her review from last year, and a guy needs to cough, and she literally stops and looks at him, but she doesn't, again, it's not like over dramatic where she's like, oh, she just like looks at him and he's like, and like contains his cough. And then she's like, I will read that again. Last year's was genius. And like, I thought that she was very interesting. And I also thought that both Emmas, wow, look at that. I thought that Cruella de Vil was also such a fascinating character, because I feel like you had the Joker struggle where you had like that internal battle of like, am I good, am I bad, is society molding me, nature versus nurture. And then you had also at the same time this like undercurrent of evil that kind of carried through. And I was really worried that when she was like friends with Jasper and Horace, and we saw her as a kid, because I remember in my research with Maleficent, the reason that people resonated with her as a character so much was because we saw her as a child. And it's very difficult to hate someone who was a child.
So you kind of mentioned the Joker. We have that nature versus nurture type of thing. But what's quite interesting about Cruella is that with the Joker, it seems to be more nurture that shaped him as this, that made him into the villain. But then with Cruella, it's more nature. It seems like she's unable to escape her biology. And there's literally this duality between how she's been raised by this good, maybe virginal mother. She fits that trope. I think Cruella's
Yeah, 100%.
Corella's adoptive mother, versus her biology, which she's like crazy because her biological mother is, at the end of the day, crazy. I think that's quite interesting. It's an interesting change because with Maleficent too, we see that again, it's not nature, it's nurture. It's her circumstances that made her a villain. So I'm interested to hear your take on what this means for Cruella's redemptive arc, because I think key to that redemptive arc is the fact that we can't blame them because society made them that way. But with Cruella, actually, it's not society, it's her. It's her biology, it's her mother. So I'm wondering, do you think that that kind of takes away part of her redemption as a character or her redemptive arc?
I think a lot of Cruella's battles are her fighting nature versus nurture, but like almost visually on screen. I think once we understand what she's fighting, everything kind of clicks together. And there's that moment where she, she thinks the fountain is her dead mom or something, but where she talks to her mom through the fountain, and she says, basically, I'm tired of trying to be these two people. Like there's only one person. And the thing that's so fascinating to me is once she reconciles these two personas, they kind of merge. So you don't have this horrifically evil character that was developing very nicely, but you also don't have this like meek little cutie pie with the hair that scarily matches mine. You have this psycho, let's just say, to use their term, person, who still has redeeming qualities. She reconciles with her friends and breaks them out of prison in a very, again, pantomime kind of way where she cross-dresses as a garbage man. And even Horace cross-dresses as a woman at some point, at the final ball. It's very funny, but I think her redemptive arc is based more in identity, and I would say almost like the psychology of her as a figure. Because I think, she says how her adoptive mother was always like, be calm, tone yourself down. And I feel like society and patriarchal structures do that to women a lot, where they're like, sit down, lower your voice, don't be bossy. And when Cruella kind of reconciles these two very contrasting qualities, you're met with an almost human person. We now have this still very female grotesque kind of look where she's got the very, very pale skin with the bright red lips and the crazy hair. But then we have this human edge to her that was kind of lost around the middle of the movie. So I think her redemption doesn't come from taking an old character and rewriting them anew, as Maleficent says. I think her redemption comes from almost an acceptance of the darker side that I think a lot of women have but are told to repress in society. So I think hers is almost a lot more realistic and I think relatable, because I think all of us are told, like, look a certain way, act a certain way. And in both rejecting and accepting that, like, she becomes a fully functioning person, which was fascinating to me.
Wow, mic drop. Damn. Yeah, wow, you explained that in a really great way. And I think that's also a kind of trope that we're starting to see more. I've argued that in female characters more recently, we see this blend of masculinity and femininity in their portrayal. And I think with Cruella, we can take that even further, that blend of good and evil. And what we get at the end of the day is not like, who was the theorist? Was it Stephanie Gens described the post-feminist Supergirl? We don't get the schizophrenic character that's really torn between, either being the good girl or the bad one. But what we see towards the end is a synthesis, and we see a well-rounded person and a more well-rounded character, well-rounded character who is kind of happy with herself, and those kind of, like you say, aspects of her, that hysteria, that brilliance, that but like what's the word, not outgoingness, but that like over the top, all of those things that
like
women are kind of
almost.
Yes, the carnivalesque, yeah, that women are told to suppress. She kind of embraces both, and she's both the good and the evil, kind of like Maleficent too. And
Yeah.
for me, I think that's like a quite a positive move, because we have a more nuanced representation of femininity. You know, femininity is not one thing. I think it's really been stereotyped and put into boxes, and you know, this is femininity, this is not. But what we see with them is like different versions of femininity, and it's on a different scale. And even masculinity, we see different masculinities too. We see masculinity in the Baroness. Then we see, her friend, who is a little bit more feminine. And I love that cross-dressing. I love cross-dressing. It's just so funny. It's just like the coolest thing when they cross-dress in a movie. I just really enjoy it.
Especially when they make it look very normalized. So whenever like I'm cross-dressing, like the character Horace was dressed in a dress. There was no relevance of it. It didn't contribute to the plot. He was just in a dress for 5 seconds to distract someone. And then he even like, I think he readjusted his like top or something, or like checked his lipstick. And I was like, that's amazing. I live for this. And then the character Artie, who is like constantly in some like Prince meets who's not, I want to say Bon Jovi, but it's not Bon Jovi. Who was just famous for cross-dressing,
maybe.
Yes, 100%. And he's like, but he's always like in the middle of, I would say, like a cross-dressing manic dream type of thing. So it's fantastic, and I agree with you. I love cross-dressing in movies because it's so challenging.
Fun. Yeah,
the men and the women. I mean, even if you take just Anita, who is a lot more meek in the way she dresses, she's still another version of femininity, because, you know, again, she's not a weak character. She doesn't buckle. She gets threatened directly by the Baroness in a terrifying way. And you don't see her almost like normalize the idea of like woman threatening woman, or she's not like, I have to run to a man to save me. She's like, cool, come, let's try. I mean, you terrify me, but no. And she doesn't actually like have any repercussions for her defiance of the Baroness. So, and even the men, they aren't like bumbling. They're not like trying to be like, we are feminists, hear us roar. They're like people. So like you have that one assistant who looks like a nervous pigeon for most of the movie, but not in an incompetent way. He's just like very panicked because of his like position in life. And I loved that. I felt like a lot of these characters, even though very dark and grimy, were a lot more human than a lot of the Disney characters we've seen who are supposed to be normal.
Yeah, I think previous Disney movies, they really relied on stereotypes and archetypes to kind of get the idea across. But I think also audiences are becoming smarter than that. Audiences want more. And I think that's why there's so many movies that, like even Joker, so many movies that portray both sides of the story, because there's that acknowledgement that actually people in general are good and bad. Everyone has good, everyone has evil, and that's just how it is. People don't exist as little stereotypes. People exist as, really well-rounded human beings, and I really can see an effort on the part of filmmakers to kind of portray that. So do you have any other like final thoughts on Cruella or the movie? Any other things you wanted to point out?
So I mentioned in the beginning that I think women can't be the same kind of insane as men can on film, in film. And the reason I say that is because I think that women are already given this certain level of hysteria to their nature. If I am a little bit flustered in a day, it's probably because I might be, I'm just overwhelmed, or I'm just loud, or I'm just hysterical. And it's, I think, something that's used to put women into a box, like lovely patriarchal box. So I think something that I've just been thinking to myself, and please feel free to, discredit me or just jump in or anything. I think that women in film who display insanity cannot be as outwardly insane. You can't have someone hysterically laughing in the streets. I think the closest we got to that was Cruella driving. That was like the closest we got to like this almost like truly insane moment where she was like smashing into cars and they were all like, oh, and she was calling everyone imbeciles. But I think for her to truly highlight her mental illnesses as a woman and to retain the power that comes with like the Joker as a murderer, I think she needed to be sneakier and cleverer. Like her intelligence needed to prove her insanity more than her outward displays. And I think that's something women, unfortunately, as film characters or figures in literature, etc., the most dangerous women are never the women who are like, I'm running through the streets screaming. They're the ones who would sow 1,000 moth eggs to a dress and let it's like, hatch in a bolt. I think there is a level of genius, as the film highlights, that has to come with insanity. And I think for female insane people, I think for men, because in patriarchal structures, they are the ones who are controlled. So therefore their binary to that would be, hysteria, or their, duality. And I think that's why when men are insane, they are insane, like, ha, 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 I'm laughing in the streets and murdering. And I think with women, we're already pigeonholed as hysterical beings. So I think our almost opposition, contrast to that would be almost like calmness, like to a point of like, coldness, let's say, like how the Baroness is, like how she's so cold and indifferent when women are supposed to be empathetic and compassionate. So I think that's how insanity is a little bit different, but for men and women in film. My 10 cents.
I totally understand what you mean. It's maybe we can say like more internal. Maybe that's the right. It's more like internal. Insanity, like you say, like much more sneaky and like sewing, I don't know, 1,000 moth eggs onto a dress, whereas like men's insanity as it is portrayed in the movies is more like external. That's a very interesting point. I never thought about that. Actually, you're right. We rarely see female characters like blah, ha ha ha. But if the Joker does that, that's totally okay. That's a very interesting point that you make. And I think, and this is, I've argued something similar in video games. If we look at like even combat style for female characters, it's more like stealth-like, more sneaky. And not so like overtly violent, like I'm just gonna shoot you all with a machine gun, but it's more like sneaking up behind or using different sneakier methods. So that's quite interesting. And yeah, you're right. There's this very age-old stereotype that women are hysterical and that it's linked to women's hormones and women somehow can't escape this hysteria. But that's why I think it's cool that the Baroness's hysteria, like you say, it's more like cold and calculated, more masculine, and it's not it's more, she's really got that more masculine character.
Because you don't really see her. I mean, even though her entire career is being torn down around her, and she finds out Cruella's alive, and she's not like screaming and running through the house. You just kind of see her face like twitch slightly, and you're like, ugh. And like, I think there's something so scary about a man laughing like to himself, almost like insanely in public, versus a woman who should be doing that and just staring you down. And I feel like that's the interest. Like you're right, it's internal. It's like an internal hysteria more than it is like this external expression of mania and hysteria. And the Baroness is scary sometimes. I mean, like she's really cool as a character, but the fact, even when Cruella's like, you killed my mother, and the Baroness is like, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to be more specific. So again, you don't have this like giant climactic confrontation where you're like, and I think the Baroness knew the whole time that was her daughter as well. So it's not like she was like, oh, gosh, like there was no point where the Baroness was like, my plans are being ruined, that is my daughter. She was still like, I killed so many people. Which one? Be more specific. And then she's like, off the cliff. And she's like, still like specific. And she's like, my mother for money. And she's like, oh, cool. Okay, I understand now. I understand where we're at. But like, she's fascinating.
Yeah, I guess you're right. That is somehow like much more terrifying than that. Indifference is much worse than, like you say, that like, oh no, there was that, I remember in Star Wars, that one scene where Kylo Ren loses his mind, or he's like so upset. So he just kind of takes a lightsaber and destroys his whole room. We never see the Baroness doing that. She's very calculated. And like you say, we just like, the only response we see is like a twitch, like, and that's interesting because, you know, women are associated with hysteria, but then the way she portrays it is, yeah, like very nonchalant. But then we have male characters have all these really emotional responses to things, like Kylo Ren destroying his whole office with a lightsaber. And I'm watching X-Files now. There's this one scene where Mulder also like trashes his whole office, or like the Jokers, like they're all so emotional. I've never actually taken note of that. I've never thought about that. Yeah, I can see actually the more I talk to you, the more I realize that the Baroness is actually quite a progressive character or progressive representation.
I feel this way because I was like Cruella, and actually talking to you now, I'm realizing that the Baroness is actually far more fascinating than the Cruella character. Not because like I love Cruella, but I mean, even when she tears up her room when she finds out she's pregnant, you don't see it. You just hear like smashing, and then you go there, and she's like calm, and she's like, "Great news, we're pregnant," and you're like, "Oh!" And like even like the foot soldier guy who like rescues Cruella and like stops her from being murdered. It's so pantomimey because she's like, why didn't you get rid of her? And he's like, "I'm so sorry. I thought when you meant take care of it, you meant like, you know, look after her." And she's like, "I thought we knew each other so well." And it was just like, she wasn't even angry. She was just like, "I thought we knew each other better. I thought you knew I wanted you to kill a child." And it's just, she's fascinating.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. She's really interesting. I think I should watch the movie again, you know, keeping that in mind. Or, you know, after we discuss it, I think I will also maybe like the character a little bit more. I think I got stuck at the fact that there's two women against each other, and the one is villainized and the one is older, but there's so much more to her actually, as you've pointed out. So yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, and thank you for explaining that about the hysteria. I forgot I asked that question in the beginning, so thank you for coming back to that. That's why I always say, sorry?
The whole time I was like, what was I trying to say with that? What was your point? You had a point.
Yeah, and then I totally forgot about it, like I always do. So, so thank you. All right, so I think we'll wrap up today's episode here. Do you have any final thoughts? Anything else about the movie?
If I could just say one thing, I would just say that I think this age in which we allow women to be grimy but still redemptive is an age of film that I'm very much looking forward to. I think the females that are coming in, well, the female characters in film are becoming so much more fascinating and intricate, and I think the men are as well, because they're allowed to be feminine. So yeah, I look forward to our next session where we discuss another very interesting film.
Yeah, me too. I totally agree. I think it's a golden age for representation and also for doing these kinds of analyses. I think we're really privileged to live in a time where we can witness a shift, like really a significant shift. And I think this is a shift we haven't seen for 20 years. You know, I really think the last shift in representation was in the 90s. And I'm like you say, I'm very excited to see what you know, what future films will look like. Especially, I'm very excited to watch the Black Widow movie too. I really think this is a really golden age for women in cinema, and yeah, we're really lucky to be able to witness the shift and to be able to talk about it, and that we have all the tools to be able to talk about it. You know, we have all these wonderful theorists that theorized all of these things for us in the 80s already. We have all that film criticism, and it's amazing how we can still use it, and how all of these things that, you know, all of these archetypes and tropes and things, they always reappear, but always in different forms, and they always evolve. I think maybe we're starting to witness even a new version of the grotesque. I don't know. You know, maybe something, yeah, that is more like an evolved female grotesque. Yeah, maybe it's premature to say that, but just in our discussion of the Baroness, I think I can see that there's more to her, or maybe these female characters fit multiple archetypes. We can't just put them in a box to be like it's one thing, but we're starting to see maybe more, how can I say, overlapping things, just as they're giving more context and as they are given more nuance, and as they are explored in more details. So yes. Courtney, thank you so much for joining today. It's always such a pleasure to talk with you and all your knowledge. And I'm not sure what our next movie will be that we're going to discuss, because I'm definitely going to call you back again to appear on the podcast.
I'm hoping they make Ursula. I really just hope they make Ursula into, I really would like to see her backstory. So hopefully we'll see that at some point.
I love Ursula. Yeah, she's really cool. Yeah, I really hope we see something. I'm not sure what's in line for this year. The only significant movies I know I want to see is Black Widow and Gunpowder Milkshake, which are all more action-based. Yeah, but when there's another witchy, grotesque type of thing that comes out, I'm gonna call you again, and I'd love to have you back. So thank you so much. And I think we'll wrap up the episode here.
Thank you for having me. As usual, always love it.
This show is brought to you by Holosuite Media. Computer, list other available Holosuite Media programs.
Loading Holosuite Preview Program 4, Blast Shield, a Star Trek Lower Decks podcast.
I think we all thought Ransom was going to go into that fight scene thinking that it was game over before it even started and he was going to lose. But I think the moment he rips his uniform off, which is hard anyway to rip a shirt, but to rip an actual jacket like that, pretty impressive. And then he had about, I don't know, I think it was 62 abs. He just looked ripped, and then he was just a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
I was just going to say, it was the way that he also narrated it. It was just perfect. It was great.
Ransom definitely went to the school of Kirk Fu. Ransom Fu, maybe we should be calling it.
Loading Holosuite Preview Program 4, The Janeway, a Star Trek Voyager podcast.
I don't know what the director, which I think was David Livingstone, was thinking here, but they basically did a montage of them running around the ship, and it's just ugh.
It was very Rocky.
It was.
I expected Eye of the Tiger to be playing.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. Especially when Shell picks up the water from the table and is drinking it.
Computer, deactivate Holosuite.